Dad's silent revenge.
Gerald Coleman kicked my mop bucket, sending dirty water across the marble floor of the executive conference room. He didn't apologize. He just looked down at me with that smug grin and said, "Clean it up again, old man, and this time, do it right." The three potential investors standing near the mahogany conference table pretended not to notice, but I saw them exchange glances. My name is Theodore Mitchell. I'm 58 years old. To my daughter and her husband, I'm just Ted the janitor, some washed-up Marine who cleans their offices for minimum wage. They have no idea that the building they're standing in belongs to me. They don't know that Mitchell Construction Empire, the company that built half the commercial district downtown, is mine. They see a man with calloused hands pushing a mop, and they assume I'm broken. I wasn't. I was gathering intelligence. The water from the bucket was spreading toward the expensive Persian rug where Patricia, my daughter, stood with the investors. She looked at me with pure embarrassment, like I was some stray dog that had wandered into her presentation. These weren't strangers. Vernon Phillips had been my business partner for 20 years, though he didn't recognize the janitor in the corner. "Dad," Patricia hissed under her breath, "just clean it up quickly, okay? We're trying to close a deal here, Dad." She still called me Dad, but only when no one important was listening. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. 4 years ago, I made the mistake of trusting my family. After my wife Beverly died, I felt lost. The cancer took her fast, minus 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. Patricia was all I had left, and when she married Gerald, I thought maybe I'd found a son. He seemed ambitious, claimed he was an investment banker with big plans for expanding the family business. That's when I made my decision. I wanted to test them, see if they'd take care of the old man, or if they'd show their true colors. So I stepped back from daily operations and handed control to my senior management team, guys I'd worked with for 15 years. Men like Stanley Tucker, who'd been my foreman before becoming my security chief, and Leonard Walsh, who'd handled our legal work since the beginning. But I didn't retire. Instead, I created a fake identity and took a job as a maintenance worker in my own building. Told everyone I was Ted Mitchell, a family friend who needed work after losing his construction job. The real Theodore Mitchell, according to the official story, was taking extended time off to grieve his wife for 3 years. I watched. I cleaned their offices. I fixed their computers. I listened to their conversations. I emptied their trash cans and raided the documents they threw away. And what I learned made my blood run cold. Gerald wasn't an investment banker. His Harvard MBA was fake. I found the diploma mill certificate hidden in his desk drawer during a late-night cleaning session. His investment clients were mostly elderly folks. He was scamming out of their retirement savings through a fake firm he'd set up using my company's address. And the money funding his lavish lifestyle, it was coming from accounts he'd been systematically draining from Mitchell Construction. Over 3 years, he'd stolen nearly $950,000. But the worst part wasn't the fraud. It was watching my daughter transform into someone I didn't recognize. Patricia used to visit me every Sunday after Beverly died, used to call just to check in and see how I was handling the grief. She'd bring flowers for Beverly's grave and we'd sit in the kitchen for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Now she only showed up when she needed something signed or when Gerald required my family friend discount on construction work for his side projects. She'd gained weight from stress and expensive dinners, started wearing makeup like armor, and spoke to service workers, including me, like they were invisible. The breaking point came at the annual Mitchell Construction holiday party. We'd always thrown a big bash for clients and employees. 20 years running, held at the same union hall where my crew felt comfortable bringing their families. But this year, Gerald decided to upgrade our brand image. He rented the ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton, hired a string quartet instead of the local band my guys liked, and invited every suit in the city who might write us a check. I was there in my janitor uniform, emptying ashtrays and collecting glasses while men I'd done million-dollar deals with walked past me like furniture. The humiliation started early. Gerald positioned himself at the center of the room, holding court with a group of potential investors. He was wearing a custom tuxedo that cost more than most of my employees made in a month, gesturing with a glass of wine that probably cost $50. The construction industry is changing, I heard him tell the group. The old guard, guys like Theodore Mitchell, they built their businesses on handshake deals and blue-collar relationships. But today's market demands sophistication, financial innovation, strategic partnerships. Vernon Phillips, who'd been nursing a beer in the corner, stepped into the conversation. Vernon preferred Budweiser to champagne even at fancy parties. Theodore Mitchell built some of the most innovative, sustainable buildings in the Southeast, he said. His LEED-certified warehouse design is still considered the gold standard. Gerald laughed, that condescending sound that made my jaw clench. That's ancient history, Vernon. Theodore's retired, spending his golden years fishing or whatever these old-timers do. The company needs young leadership, fresh vision. Patricia and I represent the future of Mitchell Construction. I was refilling the ice bucket at the bar, close enough to hear every word. Gerald had no idea that his ancient history was standing 3 feet away, wearing a name tag that read Ted M. Facilities. Speaking of the future, Gerald continued, pulling Patricia close to his side. We're announcing some exciting changes tonight. Major expansion plans, new market sectors, strategic acquisitions. Patricia beamed at the attention, but I noticed she kept glancing around nervously. She knew something was off about the numbers Gerald had been showing her, but she didn't want to ask questions that might disturb her comfortable life. That's when I saw him signal to Vincent Vinnie Phillips, no relation to Vernon, a loan shark who ran numbers out of a sports bar downtown. I'd been tracking their meetings for months, watching Gerald borrow money against company assets to cover his gambling debts and fund his lifestyle. The pieces were falling into place. Gerald wasn't just stealing from the company, he was leveraging it as collateral for his personal debts. If his schemes collapsed, Mitchell Construction would go down with him. 15 years of my employees' jobs, their pensions, their livelihoods, all of it at risk, so Gerald could play high roller. I was watching this unfold when Gerald made his fatal mistake. He spotted me near the bar and decided to make a show of it. Maybe the wine had gone to his head, or maybe he just couldn't resist the opportunity to humiliate someone in front of his new investors. Either way, he walked over with his entourage in tow. "Excuse me," Gerald said loudly, his voice carrying across half the ballroom. "You there, facilities guy?" I turned around, keeping my expression neutral. "Yes, sir. There's been a spill at table 12. Wine on the tablecloth. I need you to clean it up immediately. We have important guests sitting there." I looked toward table 12. There was no spill. The tablecloth was pristine white linen, unmarked by so much as a water ring. Gerald was testing me, seeing how far he could push the hired help in front of his audience. "I don't see any spill, sir," I said quietly. Gerald's face darkened. "Are you contradicting me? I'm telling you there's a spill that needs cleaning." He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Maybe your eyes are going bad with age. Maybe it's time we found someone younger for this job." The conversation around us had stopped. People were staring now, some with embarrassment, others with curiosity. Vernon Phillips looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Patricia stood frozen near the dessert table, her face flushing red. "I understand, sir," I said, reaching for my cleaning supplies. "I'll take care of it right away." But Gerald wasn't done. He was enjoying this too much. "You know what your problem is, old man? You people from your generation, you think you're entitled to jobs you can't handle anymore. You think showing up is enough, but this is a professional environment now." I knelt down next to table 12, pretending to clean an imaginary stain. My hands were steady, but my heart was pounding like it did during firefights in Fallujah. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the final proof I needed of who Gerald really was. "Patricia," Gerald called out, loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "Come here, honey, I want you to see this." My daughter walked over reluctantly, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She looked down at me on my hands and knees, and I saw something die in her eyes. Not love, that was still there, buried under layers of embarrassment and social climbing. It was respect. The last traces of respect for her father vanished as she watched me clean a stain that didn't exist. "This is exactly what I was talking about earlier," Gerald continued, addressing his audience like he was giving a presentation. "The old generation can't adapt to modern standards. Look at him, he can't even see a simple wine stain. How can we trust him with more complex tasks?" Someone in the crowd laughed nervously. Gerald took it as encouragement. Patricia's father was supposedly some big-shot contractor back in the day. But look where that got him, on his knees, cleaning up after his betters. That's the difference between old money and new money. Old money dies with the old generation. Vernon Phillips stepped forward. "Now hold on a minute, Gerald. That's enough." But Gerald was on a roll, drunk on wine and power, and the attention of the crowd. "Vernon, with all due respect, this is exactly the kind of thinking that's holding back the construction industry. Loyalty to has-beens instead of investment in innovators. You want to talk about has-beens?" Vernon's voice was getting louder. Theodore Mitchell revolutionized sustainable construction in this state. His warehouse design saved companies millions in energy costs. "What exactly have you built, Gerald?" Gerald laughed. "I've built relationships, Vernon. Financial partnerships, strategic alliances." Theodore Mitchell pushed wheelbarrows and mixed concrete. "I move capital and create opportunities." I stood up slowly, dropping my cleaning rag into the bucket. The sound echoed in the suddenly quiet ballroom. Every eye in the room was on me, but I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at Patricia. My daughter stood there in her $500 dress, holding a champagne glass that cost more than my weekly salary, watching her husband destroy her father's reputation for entertainment. And she said nothing. She just stood there, silent, letting it happen. That silence cut deeper than Gerald's words ever could. You're right about one thing, Gerald, I said, my voice calm and steady. Old money does die with the old generation, but you might want to be more careful about which generation you're burying. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out my wallet. From it, I extracted a business card, not the cleaning company card I was supposed to carry, but my real one. Cream-colored stock, raised lettering, simple and elegant. Theodore Mitchell, chairman and founder, Mitchell Construction Empire. I handed the card to Vernon Phillips. He looked at it, looked at me, and his face went white. Holy hell, Vernon whispered. Ted, is that really you? The silence that followed was deafening. Gerald's wine glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor, red wine spreading like blood across the white stone. Patricia's champagne flute followed a second later. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, addressing the room in the voice that had commanded respect in boardrooms for 30 years. I apologize for the confusion. There seems to be some misunderstanding about my role here tonight. I looked directly at Gerald. His face had gone from flushed red to pale green in about 10 seconds. Sweat was beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. You see, Gerald's been managing day-to-day operations for the past 3 years while I've been observing, and you're absolutely right about one thing. It is time for some changes. I turned to Vernon. Could you do me a favor, old friend? Call Leonard Walsh. Tell him it's time for phase 2. Vernon nodded, already reaching for his phone. The crowd was buzzing now, whispers spreading like wildfire through the ballroom. Gerald was backing away from me, bumping into other guests, looking like a cornered animal. This is insane, Gerald stammered. You're just the maintenance guy. Patricia, tell them he's lost his mind, but Patricia wasn't looking at Gerald anymore. She was staring at me, realization dawning on her face like sunrise after a long, dark night. The man she'd been embarrassed by, the father she'd watched clean imaginary stains, was the same man whose company had paid for her wedding, her house, her entire lifestyle. Gerald made a run for it then, pushing through the crowd toward the exit like a man fleeing a fire. But Stanley Tucker was already moving. I'd spotted him earlier working undercover as hotel security, and he'd been waiting for my signal. Stanley stepped into Gerald's path just as he reached the ballroom doors. Going somewhere, Mr. Coleman? Stanley asked, his marine bearing unmistakable despite the hotel uniform. I think Mr. Mitchell would like a word. Gerald spun around, wild-eyed, looking for another exit. But Leonard Walsh had just walked through the main entrance, flanked by 2 men in dark suits who definitely weren't hotel staff. Leonard had been my lawyer for 15 years, and he'd been preparing for this moment for months. Good evening, Gerald, Leonard said, approaching with the calm confidence of a man holding a royal flush. I have some papers you need to see. The crowd had formed a loose circle around us now, like spectators at a car accident. Some were pulling out phones, recording what was clearly about to become the most talked-about moment in Atlanta construction industry history. Leonard opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. Federal warrant for the seizure of all assets purchased with funds embezzled from Mitchell Construction. State warrant for fraud, identity theft, and securities violations. And my personal favorite, an IRS audit notice covering the last 3 years of your tax returns. Gerald's knees nearly buckled. This is harassment. I haven't done anything illegal. I work for the company. I have authorization. You have authorization to steal nearly $1 million. Leonard's voice cut through Gerald's protests like a knife. You have authorization to forge my client's signature on loan documents? You have authorization to run investment scams using Mitchell Construction's address and reputation. I watched the color drain from Gerald's face as Leonard laid out the evidence we'd been building for 3 years. Every forged signature, every fake credential, every penny stolen from company accounts. Stanley had been my inside man, using his access to install surveillance equipment and document Gerald's activities. Leonard had been building the legal case, working with federal prosecutors who were very interested in Gerald's elder fraud schemes. The FBI will want to speak with you about your investment advisory business, Leonard continued, specifically about the 47 clients, all over age 65, minus who invested their retirement savings based on credentials you don't possess for returns you never delivered. Gerald looked around the ballroom desperately, searching for an ally, an escape route, anything. His eyes landed on Patricia, who was standing frozen near the bar, still holding her broken champagne glass. Patricia, Gerald pleaded, tell them we're married, we're partners in this business. I had implied authority to make financial decisions. My daughter looked at her husband for a long moment. I saw her process everything, the lies, the fraud, the humiliation he'd just put me through. The realization that her lifestyle, her social status, even her wedding ring had been purchased with stolen money. I want a lawyer, she said quietly, my own lawyer, not his. That's when the FBI agents Leonard had brought stepped forward. The taller one, Agent Sarah Morrison, addressed Gerald directly. Gerald James Coleman, you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, securities fraud, and elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent. As Miranda rights were being read, I found myself thinking about Beverly. She would have hated this spectacle, the public humiliation, the family drama played out in front of half the city's business community. But she also would have understood why it was necessary. Sometimes the only way to stop a cancer is to cut it out, even when the surgery is painful. Gerald was handcuffed and led away, still protesting his innocence, still claiming he had authority to access company funds. The crowd began to disperse, conversations buzzing with shock and speculation. Several people approached me, colleagues I'd worked with for decades, men who'd finally recognized the janitor as their old friend Theodore Mitchell. Vernon Phillips clapped me on the shoulder. Hell of a way to come out of retirement, Ted. Though I have to ask, why the elaborate setup? Why not just fire the son of a bitch 3 years ago? I looked across the ballroom at Patricia, who was sitting alone at a table, staring at her hands. Because I needed to know who my daughter really was. I needed to see if she'd choose right over easy, truth over comfort. I needed to know if the values Beverly and I tried to teach her had taken root, or if we'd failed as parents. Vernon followed my gaze, and now you know. Now I know. Patricia stood up slowly and walked toward us. Her makeup was smeared from crying, and she'd kicked off her expensive heels. She looked younger somehow, more like the girl who used to help me in the garage on weekends. Dad, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. I nodded. The house, the cars, my credit cards, was that all? Company money that Gerald stole. Yes. The mortgage payments, the lease payments, even your shopping allowances, all of it came from accounts he was draining systematically. Patricia closed her eyes. So I have nothing. No house, no car, no savings. You have a college degree I paid for, I said. You have skills and intelligence. You have your health and your youth. That's more than most people start with. She nodded, processing this. What happens now? Leonard answered for me. The assets will be seized to pay restitution to Gerald's victims. The house will be foreclosed, the cars repossessed. Any joint accounts will be frozen pending the criminal investigation. But I didn't know, Patricia said desperately. I swear I didn't know he was stealing. Maybe not the details, I said, but you knew enough. You knew Gerald's claimed salary couldn't support your lifestyle. You knew he had no real credentials, no proven track record. You chose not to ask questions because you liked the answers ignorance gave you. The ballroom was nearly empty now, just family and the lingering smell of expensive wine and broken dreams. Patricia looked around at the opulent surroundings, the crystal chandeliers, the marble floors, the gilded walls. I was so ashamed of you tonight, she said. Watching you clean that floor, I was embarrassed to be your daughter, and now you understand that honest work isn't shameful. I finished. Being a janitor, a construction worker, a mechanic, there's dignity in those jobs. The shame is in taking money you didn't earn, living a life you didn't build. Patricia left that night with nothing but her purse and the clothes on her back. I offered her a ride home, but she reminded me she didn't have a home anymore. Instead, she called her college roommate and asked to sleep on her couch. It was the first honest conversation she'd had in years. The next 6 months were hard on everyone. Gerald's trial made the front page of the Atlanta Business Journal 3 times. The evidence was overwhelming: 34 forged documents, 47 defrauded elderly investors, and nearly $950,000 in embezzled funds. His fake Harvard MBA became a running joke in legal circles. The judge, Dorothy Foster, was particularly harsh during sentencing. Mr. Coleman, Judge Foster said, "You didn't just steal money, you stole people's trust, their retirement security, their faith in honest business. You preyed on seniors who worked their entire lives to build the nest eggs you squandered on gambling and luxury. 8 years in federal prison is insufficient for the damage you've caused, but it's what the law allows." Gerald served his time at a minimum security facility in South Carolina. I heard through Leonard that he spent most of it in the library, supposedly writing a book about his experience. No publisher was interested. Vincent Phillips, the loan shark, got 5 years for racketeering when the FBI followed the money trail from Gerald's gambling debts. Turns out he'd been running numbers for half the construction industry, threatening contractors who couldn't pay their debts. Several of my competitors testified against him, grateful that someone had finally taken him down. As for Patricia, she moved into a studio apartment in Virginia Highland and got a job as an administrative assistant at a small marketing firm, not as a manager or director, as an entry-level employee making $28,000 a year. She took the bus to work, shopped with coupons, and learned that a dollar earned feels different than a dollar given. I didn't contact her for the first 3 months. I wanted to, especially when Stanley reported seeing her at the grocery store, carefully comparing prices on generic brands. But I knew that if I stepped in too soon, if I cushioned the fall, she'd never learn the lesson. Mitchell Construction thrived without Gerald's management. I promoted Stanley Tucker to Chief Operating Officer and brought in my nephew, William Barnes, fresh out of Georgia Tech with an engineering degree and no sense of entitlement. We landed 3 major contracts in the first quarter after Gerald's arrest, including a sustainable housing development that would employ 150 people for 2 years. The company was worth about $15 million when I officially came out of retirement, and we were growing steadily. Not the flashy, leveraged growth Gerald had pursued, but solid, honest expansion built on reputation and relationships. One Saturday morning in late spring, I was in my home office reviewing blueprints when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Patricia standing on my porch, holding an envelope. She looked thinner, tired, but there was something different in her eyes. Something I hadn't seen since she was a teenager working summer jobs to pay for her car insurance. "Hi, Dad," she said. "I was hoping we could talk." I invited her in and made coffee, real coffee, not the expensive stuff Gerald used to demand. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where she'd done homework as a kid, where Beverly and I had planned our future, where I'd sat alone after the funeral wondering if I'd failed as a father. "I brought you something," Patricia said, sliding the envelope across the table. Inside was a handwritten letter on plain notebook paper and a money order for $75. "It's not much," she said quickly, "but it's the first money I saved after paying all my bills with my own salary. Rent, groceries, bus fare, everything. This is what was left over from last month." I read the letter. Her handwriting had changed, less elegant, more practical. Like she'd stopped trying to impress people and started focusing on communication. "Dad," she'd written, "I know $75 doesn't come close to what Gerald stole or what you spent raising me, or what I cost you in heartbreak. But it's mine. I earned every dollar of it answering phones and filing paperwork and being polite to people who treat me like I'm invisible. For the first time in my adult life, I understand what you meant about honest work. I'm sorry it took me so long to learn what you were trying to teach me. I'm sorry I chose comfort over character. I'm sorry I let Gerald humiliate you while I stood there caring more about appearances than family. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that your daughter finally grew up. Love, Patricia." I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. Then I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by practical slacks and a simple blouse. Her manicured nails were short and unpolished. She wore minimal makeup and her hair was pulled back in a functional ponytail, but she looked more beautiful than she had in years. "I'm proud of you," I said. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "I lost everything, Dad. The house, the car, my credit rating, my social circle. Some days I can barely afford lunch." "You didn't lose everything," I said. "You lost the things that were never really yours. What you found was yourself." We talked for 3 hours that morning, about Beverly, about the business, about the mistakes we'd both made. Patricia told me about her job, how she was learning to find satisfaction in small accomplishments, how she'd started volunteering at a senior center on weekends. "The old folks there remind me of you," she said. "They have these amazing stories about building businesses and raising families and surviving hard times. I used to think they were boring, but now I realize they're the ones who built everything I took for granted." As she prepared to leave, Patricia hesitated at the door. "Dad, I know I have no right to ask this, but do you think someday I might earn my way back into the family business? Not as a gift, not because I'm your daughter, but because I've proven I'm worth hiring." I smiled. "You already have, Patricia. William Barnes is doing great work, but we're going to need a marketing coordinator soon. Someone who understands both the blue-collar values that built this company and the professional presentation that modern clients expect. Interested?" The job paid $45,000 a year, minus about half what Gerald had been stealing annually. Patricia took it, and over the next 2 years she proved herself invaluable. She understood clients because she'd learned humility. She respected workers because she'd been one. Today, Mitchell Construction is worth $22 million and employs $200 people. Patricia is our marketing director, a title she earned through 5 a.m. meetings and weekend project sites and treating every customer like family. She drives a used Honda and lives in a modest house she's buying with a 30-year mortgage. That $75 money order is framed in my office, right next to Beverly's picture and my Marine discharge papers. It represents something no inheritance could ever provide, the moment my daughter chose to become a woman I could respect. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children isn't protection from consequences, it's the strength to learn from them. You see, revenge isn't about destroying someone, it's about letting them destroy themselves while you document the process for justice. The hardest lesson I learned as a father wasn't how to provide for my child, but when to stop providing so she could learn to provide for herself.